Democratization and secularism in Yemen. The democratization process in Yemen. The democratization process in Yemen has been a long and arduous one, with many setbacks along the way. The country has been in a state of political and economic turmoil for many years, with the Houthis launching a coup d'état in 2014. In 2011, the Yemeni revolution began, and Yemeni civil society groups have played an instrumental role in bringing about the democratic transition that has been taking place in recent years. Their activities have played a major role in promoting peace and democracy in the country. However, there is a worrying trend among some young members of civil society groups that are threatening to undermine the political stability of the country. Since the 2011 uprising, several new civil society groups have been set up, many of which have foreign funding and support. Some of these groups have links to extremist groups that have sought to undermine the peaceful political transition that is taking place in the country. Yemen has experienced political turmoil and civil conflict in recent years. The country has undergone a democratization process, aimed at establishing a more representative and accountable government. The GPC had ruled for 3 decades, before the Arab uprising of 2011, during which time opposition parties were suppressed, human rights were violated, and corruption was rampant, which led to nationwide protests against the regime, which later was named the Arab Spring. A series of uprisings that took place in the Arab world in 2011 had a significant impact on Yemen. Protests erupted in the country, calling for the end of President Ali Abdullah Saleh's rule. Saleh was forced to step down in 2012, and a transition government was established. The transition government was tasked with overseeing a democratic transition and drafting a new constitution. The process was complicated by several challenges, including the fragmentation of the opposition, the intervention of Iran-backed Houthi rebels, and the intervention of Saudi Arabia. The democratization process in Yemen is ongoing, but progress has been slow. The country is still facing many challenges, including political instability, corruption, poverty, and a humanitarian crisis. The situation is further complicated by the ongoing conflict between the Houthi rebels and the internationally recognized government. Despite the challenges, there have been some positive developments, including the formation of a new constitution and the establishment of a more representative government. However, much work remains to be done to establish a genuinely democratic and accountable government in Yemen. The Arab Spring of 2011. The Arab Spring was a series of popular uprisings and protests that swept through the Middle East and North Africa in 2011, challenging long-standing autocratic regimes and calling for political and social change. Yemen was one of the countries affected by the Arab Spring, and the events of 2011 had a profound impact on the country's political, social, and economic landscape. The Arab Spring in Yemen began with peaceful protests and demonstrations in the capital city of Sana'a and other cities around the country. The protesters called for an end to corruption, poverty, and political repression, and greater political and economic freedoms. They also called for the resignation of President Ali Abdullah Saleh, who had been in power for over 3 decades. As the protests continued, President Saleh initially refused to step down, and the government responded with force, using police and military units to crack down on the protesters. This resulted in a violent escalation, with protesters being killed and arrested, and the opposition becoming more organized and vocal. Eventually, after several months of protests and violence, President Saleh agreed to step down, and the country was placed under the leadership of Vice President Abd Rabbu Mansour Hadi. This was seen as a positive development, as it offered hope for a more stable and democratic future for Yemen. However, the aftermath of the Arab Spring in Yemen was not without its challenges. The country faced ongoing political and social instability, as well as economic challenges, such as high levels of poverty, unemployment, and inflation. In addition, there was an ongoing conflict between various ethnic and religious groups, as well as with the government and opposition forces. Despite these challenges, the Arab Spring in Yemen was seen as a significant turning point for the country. It marked the end of a long period of autocratic rule and offered hope for a more democratic and inclusive future. The events of 2011 showed that ordinary Yemenis were willing to stand up and fight for their rights and freedoms, and that they were willing to challenge the status quo and call for change. The Arab Spring in Yemen was a defining moment for the country, marking the end of a long period of autocratic rule and offering hope for a more democratic and inclusive future. The Arab Spring in Yemen was therefore a significant moment in the country's history, and its impact will continue to be felt for many years to come. Secularism in Yemen. Secularism in Yemen is a complex and controversial topic, with a range of opinions and beliefs about the role of religion in public life. At its core, secularism is a political and social ideology that advocates for the separation of religion and state, allowing individuals to freely practice their religion or not practice a religion at all. This is in contrast to countries where religion is heavily intertwined with the government and the law, such as Yemen. Yemen is a predominantly Muslim country, and its constitution declares that Islam is the state religion. This means that the government promotes Islamic cultural values and practices and that Sharia law is a main source of legislation. Religion, therefore, plays a significant role in public life, shaping social norms, laws, and institutions. Despite this, there is a small minority of secular-minded individuals and some political parties in Yemen that advocate for a separation of religion and state. They argue that the government should not promote or regulate any particular religion, but rather respect the individual rights and freedoms of all citizens. They believe this would create a more tolerant and diverse society, allowing Yemen to modernize and progress in the 21st century. However, these views are often met with opposition from religious groups and conservative political parties. They argue that secularism is a threat to Islamic values and traditions and that it goes against the will of the majority of Yemenis who are Muslims. They also argue that the government must promote and protect Islamic beliefs and practices and that secularism would lead to moral decay and social disorder. The debate over secularism in Yemen is therefore a complex and nuanced one, with competing ideas about the role of religion in public life. On one hand, secularists argue for individual rights and freedoms, and a more progressive and tolerant society. On the other hand, religious groups and conservatives argue for preserving Islamic values and traditions, and for a strong role for religion in government and society. Secularism in Yemen is a controversial topic, with a range of opinions and beliefs about the role of religion in public life. The debate over secularism will likely continue for some time, as Yemen strives to balance its religious heritage with the demands of a modern and diverse society. The process of secularization has been slower and more complicated due to the strong influence of Islam and the political and social challenges facing the country. Despite this, there have been some signs of secularization in recent years. For example, the number of secular-minded individuals has been growing, and there are some political parties and organizations that advocate for a separation of religion and state. There have also been some efforts to modernize the education system and increase the role of secular institutions, such as the judiciary and the media. These developments suggest that there is a growing recognition of the need for secular values and institutions in Yemeni society. There have also been ongoing political, social, and economic challenges in the country, which have made it difficult for secularization to take hold. In addition, there have been ongoing conflicts and instability in the region, which have made it difficult for secular values and institutions to take root. Secularization in Yemen is a complex and challenging process, due to the strong influence of Islam and the political and social challenges facing the country.